All right, so today we're going to just talk just a little bit, be a short video about asymmetrical lobes. A bunch of people have asked about asymmetrical lobes and how that works, and degreeing cams and finding intake center line. So hang loose and we'll unpack that a little bit. Alright, so I'm going to put my glasses on because I can't half see. We got power. We are back in the shop. That's a wonderful thing. It literally, I was trying to get ready to do this video today, and I looked outside and the power was back on the shop. I could see the light over the parking lot. So hopefully we not going to have no more power issues. When we talk about asymmetrical lobes, and we've talked about it a little bit in other videos, but I've had just recently in some of the other deals we've been doing, I had several people ask again some specific questions, so I'm gonna try to answer those as best I can. So, and Andrew will put some illustrations on the screen. So you got a lobe, you know, and just we'll put it up here. So we got a lobe. We're going to draw a straight line down the center, and from heel to toe, and that's going to be our center line. So ultimately, regardless of what's going on either side, because we run into this with asymmetrical lobes or inverse radius lobes, and we see a lot of inverse radius stuff on like finger follower and cam on rocker systems in this overhead cam stuff. So for most push rod V8s and even probably most direct action flat tappet type stuff, where the asymmetry happens most of the time is in the closing side, and it usually happens, you know, near the ramp in the closing side. So what you'll see is, so we talked about in the last video, we talked about intensity. So and I've got some examples here, because I just run a cam that I just reground, so I got some fresh data that we can talk about. So so you've got intensity, and so so we talked about hydraulic intensity. So major intensity is the 20 thousandths lift duration minus the 50 thousandths lift duration. So generally, if we're going to rate a mechanical cam, we're going to use major intensity, which is the 20 from the 50. So this particular cam, the intake has intensity of 35, and the exhaust has an intensity of 41.5. So the opening side on the intake, so we got 35 intensity total. So you've got to divide that on each side, but it doesn't always divide equally, because sometimes we have asymmetry, or we call it span. So span is the distance of intensity on each side. So if you got 35, or use 30 for an easy number, it could be 15 and 15, or it could be 14 and 16, or 13 and 17. So it could be a lot of different things, but this one is 35 total. On the intake, it's 18.5. On the opening side, it's 18.54, and on the closing side, it's 16.5. So it's not tremendously faster on the opening side, but it is faster. Now, in retrospect, on the exhaust side, the opening side is 21 and the closing side is 20.5. So it's just ultimately it's the same. That half probably was just in how the design data laid out. It probably wasn't, asymmetrical on purpose or had span on purpose. So so without a cam doctor, you may think it's impossible to see this stuff, but it's not. So when you degree your cam, you can literally, go to 20 lift on the intake and write down the degree wheel reading, go to 50 on the intake, write down the degree wheel reading, and then go all the way around to the closing side of the same lobe and do the same thing again, write down to 50, write down to 20, and then you can, add and subtract those numbers together and come up with the total intensity, major intensity, and then the span of the intensity. And that'll tell you whether or not you have an asymmetrical lobe or you have a symmetrical lobe. Generally speaking, not always, not every time, but generally speaking, most good designs are gonna be asymmetrical. They're gonna have a span. Now, having said that, I've seen some people asking about inverse radius lobes. So an inverse radius, and we'll put a picture up, but an inverse radius, and I don't have anything here, this inverse radius, because for the most part nobody uses that stuff anymore, except I do have some in overhead cam stuff. And the problem, the reason that it's used in overhead cam stuff is when you've got a finger follower or a camel rocker, the center line as it goes through the cycle, because like on a I don't know if I got a picture. I'll see if I can put a picture up. But the way, like, you think of a modular Ford or 2300 Ford or the Coyotes, so you've got, a hydraulic lash adjuster here, the valves here, the cams here, and as it's rolling around and opening, the rocker is doing this. So the actual wheel that's following the cam is moving in an arc. So that arc makes the valve event, the valve motion, a lot different on the opening side versus the closing side. Therefore, a lot of, when you look at the lobe of many like overhead cam stuff, like I know I see it on, it's not quite so prevalent like on the Coyotes and the mod Fords because they're so big, but when you get down, a really small lobe like the Atlas GM stuff or the Ecotechs or the 2300 Fords, when you look at the lobe, it almost looks like a kidney bean. And when you look at that, you would think that because it's so much asymmetry and inverse flank on the closing side, that the valve motion on this side of the lobe and the valve motion on this side of the lobe have got to be way different, because they just physically look totally different. But the way the arc swings of the rocker, the valve motion on both sides are the same, or it could have span and be like this stuff we're talking about, but essentially it's very, very similar. And but the reason it has to have such an inverse radius is because of the way the arc happens when the rocker is swinging. And that's why the overhead cam stuff is really complicated in the fact that the lobe design is complicated, because most, if not all, lobe designers today work backwards from valve motion. So they have a valve motion that they want, and all of that through math is worked backwards into what that lobe has to look like to create the valve motion that they want. So that's a lot of math and a lot of spreadsheets and a lot of coffee and Advil, and it's above my pay grade. So, but I'm just saying that that's where you really see inverse radius stuff, and you got to be careful with inverse radius stuff, because with normal grinders, most of them run an 18-inch wheel, and a lot of inverse radiuses, the radius is smaller than 9 inches, which would be what the wheel is. So you have to run a smaller wheel, or like a lot of the CNC grinders are running a 10 or a 12-inch wheel, and so they can do a lot smaller inverse flank than a manual grinder can. But we can put a smaller wheel on and do inverse radiuses. But again, and for the most part, most people just don't use an inverse radius, and it was like I say, it was a big thing. It's still, even though it looks like it's dipping in and doing all this stuff, it's still in a push rod deal. Well, even in a swing and follower deal, it's still making positive acceleration. It's still just translating into linear motion at the valve. So it's it's not like snake oil. It's just, instead of going this way to get from here to here, they just went this way to get from here to here. And sometimes I think, and again, I'm not a lobe designer, but that inverse radius and then having to go back the other direction, at a really high surface footage, I think that could be problematic, because you go in one way and now you got to completely go the other way. So, there's a lot of stuff going on there, and apparently it's really hard to manufacture. Even with CNC equipment, it's really hard. So if stuff's hard to make, it's probably not ideal anyway, because if stuff's hard to make, it's quality's hard, right? So that's why. But I know people get kind of fixated on some of that stuff, and it's cool to talk about and all that junk, but in practicalities, most of the time it's just not. Just cause you had some of that stuff, or it's out there, you're not gonna set new track records with it. There's so much going on with this normal stuff that we still ain't got figured out, that all of that's a whole nother deal. So I have seen stuff with, back to this span or asymmetry, like this is 18 and a half and 16 and a half. So that's only 2 different. I've seen some stuff 4 or 5 different. So I've seen stuff with a lot more asymmetry than this. And let me see, I'll bring you around here. So this is the lobes that we just run. This is the intake, this is the exhaust, and this is the velocity curve. And we've talked about the way the ramps are and that kind of stuff, but for the most part, I don't know if hopefully you can see the cursor down here on the bottom left. All of that asymmetry is generally going to happen in this area here. So, or maybe that's better, in this area here, like here and here. Up here, most of this stuff is symmetrical for the most part. Now I do have some really big lift stuff that it's obvious that even up here past the nose radius, it's asymmetrical. But like I say, don't worry about trying to do nothing crazy with the center lines. I mean, that line straight down at peak lift, going back 50, and you don't even have to go back 50. I mean, sometimes I'll go back 20 or 10 or whatever, just as long as when you find peak lift, you back up the same amount on either side of the peak, and 50's fine, but 40's fine too. So it's not super critical that it's a given number. It's just that the number that you do is the same on both sides. So you just back up whatever, 20, 30, 40, 50 on this side and do the same thing on the other side, split the difference, and that is the center line, even if the lobe's symmetrical or not symmetrical. Because when it tails out, the ends are in the same place. The asymmetry is up here, higher up. So it's from seat to seat, it's still the same difference ultimately. So that's that, and hopefully that'll clear that up. And I don't know if there's more stuff about this kind of stuff that you want to know about, and if I'm qualified to answer the question, I 100% will. So feel free to just put it in the comments if you got more questions. And like I say, we're gonna try to just slowly go through this stuff and try to make some of it make some kind of sense. And at least if it, I'm not saying that you can use it always, but at least you'll have a better understanding of like what's going on with all of this, because people still think it's like black magic, and it's confusing. A lot of this stuff is confusing, and it took me a really long time to get my mind wrapped around some of this stuff, and I still have trouble with some of it, but it's getting better as we go, and we're just learning all the time. And I enjoy sharing, and I hope you enjoy me sharing it with you. And as long as that's the case, we're gonna keep doing it. So hopefully this is helpful. Let me know in the comments, and like I say, if you got other ideas, let me know. And I'll show you this little big block here that we knocked out. It had a hurt lobe, and we salvaged it. It was pretty good. It wasn't nothing real crazy, and the core was good. So we was able to put it back almost right where it was, within a couple of degrees, and the lift was within 5 or 10. So I think it's a blower deal, I'm pretty sure. So that slightly softer exhaust lobe may be helpful anyway, because the with that blower stuff is having to open under pressure, so the exhaust lobe gets the brunt anywhere, the exhaust lifter, so it'll kill the wheel sometimes if you ain't careful. So anyway, I'm glad we got power back, and tomorrow we will be back in action full time in the shop. So but don't blow us up, because tomorrow for sure is going to be catch up with all of this junk. But hopefully maybe by Friday or Monday everything will be back to normal. And if you're waiting on stuff from us, we got a pile, it looks like, to go out tomorrow, UPS. So if your stuff ain't on the way, it will be tomorrow. Thank y'all so much, and we'll see you on the next one.